Record. Okay, so here is my code for the third LabVIEW homework. Starting in, we can recognize the problem requested a push button with a mechanical action switch until released. Um, so we wanted the program to start at 0, and then once the button gets pressed, it begins to climb up in increments of 5, and then whenever the button gets pressed again, it then shifts down into a different mode where it starts decreasing by values of 2 until it hits 0. It would never go below 0, and so you can toggle between adding and subtracting, but you'll never go below 0. You can go up as high as you want. It needs to happen every second. So to get this to work, it's put into a while loop. Inside the while loop, we have a stop button configured, so that way, whenever the user wants to make the program end, you just have to hit the button and it stops. Inside, it's also this wait. So adding the 1000 into the wait makes it so that it updates every second, so that way it increments every second, either up or down. And there are two shift registers in the while loop. So the first shift register is the top one, and it stores the output value. It begins at 0 because that was requested in the problem statement. And then the second one stores the increment value. And so that starts at 0. And the reason it starts at 0 is because we don't want it adding or subtracting until we push the push button, or the user pushes the push button. So in this true case, so whenever the button gets pressed, it will then choose a increment value. So the 0 gets fed in, and then right here is greater than 0. So obviously 0 isn't greater than 0, it is 0. It gets put into a false input into the selector block, and the false input here is 5. And so that begins the counter to start going up by 5. So because it gets stored in the shift register, so for the next um, not increment, the next iteration of the while loop, it then can go into the false, and so the false is what's running like pretty much all the time until the button gets pushed. And so it takes that initial value of 0, and then because we had this as an initial value, it stays at 0. They get added together. But once the 5 gets put in, then it's 0 plus 5. Then the 5 gets fed in. It goes into this selector block where it is the true option, and then it gets fed into this inequality where it gets compared. 5 is greater than or equal to 0. So this prevents the program from ever having the output go to 0. So it is true, and so this value gets output here. If it was false, like if it was, let's say you had a value of 1, you were subtracting by 2, and it'd be -1, then it just gets put into 0. And that gets put into the output and the shift register. So if we hit true again, then and we have 5, well, we know 5 is greater than 0, so that is true, and then that toggles into a -2. The biggest trouble I had with this program was not recognizing the in the different cases. Like this one, the output value, I just wired it back in to this side of the shift register. Without this, it would just stick on 5, and the increment value would just go to 0. Or actually, I'm sorry, I had that backwards. In the false, so this right here, the increment value, I had to wire back to maintain its progress. So after it got added, it would then just stop going up because of this true without wiring it here. And then whenever I would hold down the button, it would just reset to 0 because this wasn't here. The increment would get reset itself. And so everything was wrong without these two wires. But once they were added, everything worked fine. So a quick demonstration as I hit run on the program, you can see that the output's not changing in any way. I click and hold down for a second because that's how many times whoops, wasn't long enough. That's how long the program kind of needs to be able to update it. And then it starts going up by 5. And before it gets up too high, I'll do that again. Okay. Not holding it down long enough. Yeah. So then it starts going down. And it'll take a couple seconds, but it should never go below 0. There you can see it never goes below 0. Click it again. Goes up by 5. Want to stop the program? Hit stop. And so that is my code. Thank you.